All of the big ticket items of the Exodus event were all caused by a magnetic excursion event. Normally we have convection currents and things down here causing the normal magnetic field, but sometimes if there's a major disruption, it will actually distort the magnetic field and cause it to be dented inwards. If these troughs are significant enough, they will allow the solar wind, really highly energetic particles, to come blasting down through the center there and expose us to basically a column of high energy particles coming down and just like burning into the atmosphere. And they effectively burn up. You start to get these auroras popping up in just like random places around the world. You can have something like this just popping up in like one specific spot and nowhere else. You would have this dent in the magnetic field right above that area, above this Red Sea area. If this is Sinai, if this is the tip of the Sinai Peninsula, and this is Arabia over here, and this is Africa and like Egypt, you got the Nile, and this is all the Red Sea, the Nile River, and this is like the Red Sea here. You got like Sinai here, the tip. You would see a central column of solar wind coming down here and or cosmic rays. It would be blasting down through that center there where it was the weakest, just burning into the atmosphere. It would be a literal column of fire. They said they saw a column of fire. If you have all that intense solar energy just pouring down into this, it's creating a bunch of heat down here, and that heat is creating a bunch of pressure, and that pressure is going to be pushing out on everything. This would actually be like the opposite of a hurricane. This is what hurricanes do. They cause the ocean to like bulge up into that vacuum area. Centrifuge at the core, creating a vacuum. It's literally sucking the ocean up. When a major hurricane makes landfall, it'll just drag the ocean onto the land with it. A magnetic excursion event over water does precisely the opposite. It creates a really high pressure, and that high pressure crushes down the ocean. It would be like a massive bowl shape. And then you have a bunch of really powerful wind coming out, dragging the water out even harder, pulling the bowl down even lower. Between the pressure and the wind, you could crush the ocean down pretty significantly. Looking at about a 5-story deep depression in the ocean. The ocean would be just sort of like pressed out in a giant bowl shape. So this would be like a giant bowl here. You'd have a bunch of like land in here that was exposed. This like, land bridge they talk about. This area would be water, but it would be like a bowl, like one of those big skate park bowls. And that wind would be carrying up a huge amount of moisture with it. And that moisture would be forming a bunch of massive cumulonimbus clouds over this area. This would be a ton of hot air in here. And what it would want to do is go back up, because it's hot air. So it wants to go back up. So all of this like really hot, warm air all around this is going to want to be going back up. It's going to be spinning up. We call these water spouts, but you can call them tornadoes or whirlwinds. And these would be creating some enormous cumulonimbus clouds up here. You would have the ocean splitting apart in a giant bowl, exposing a land bridge, and then you'd have these giant water spout tornadoes blasting up, creating massive cumulonimbus clouds in the area. This is exactly what they said came between them and the Egyptian army, a column of clouds. They would have been crossing from here to here, and then Pharaoh, when he caught up to them, would have been trying to chase them in here, but one of these just came right in between them. So you'd have these massive clouds over here. They would be drifting out over the desert. That sweeping effect, that would help to give this more of an eastwardly push to it, nudge it out further into the desert, like arcing that out into the desert like that. This would be providing them an enormous amount of shade. They said that they were always beneath the clouds of glory, and it was giving them shade out there. They were following all of these things. They were following a column of fire in the sky at night and a column of clouds in the day, and they were following the clouds of glory whenever those would move. But also, this system, it's also going to be raining. It's going to be dumping a huge amount of rain onto these watersheds over here, onto these mountains. This is going to be providing them a huge amount of fresh drinking water. And that's always just been this total unknown. How in the world where did they get all that water from? No one's ever been able to find anything to answer that, this system was like following the coast most of the time. And that's how it was providing them with all of this fresh drinking water in these clouds, because it was sticking to the coast. People have been looking for this place, Mount Sinai. At Mount Sinai, they said a huge storm gathered around it, and then a bunch of fire from heaven just started blasting down onto it, just like started descending down upon it. And then the mountain itself began to rumble, and then they heard this like really heavy horn sound. That fire from heaven was this fire from this heaven, and it just had drifted out here. Years later, 40 years later, they were leaving the wilderness, crossing the river Jordan, and they said that at Jericho, they were instructed to like walk around it and start blowing their horns. Then the walls of Jericho, famously crumbled down. This bad boy, if this was in the daytime over the Jericho area, if this system was in that area behind Jericho and just start blasting down in the daytime, and without these clouds around it, making it dark underneath, in the daytime, you wouldn't really see this column of fire. The reason they saw it at Mount Sinai is because you had all these like really heavy duty clouds around the area, making it really dark. They like specifically said it was like really dark underneath, but at Jericho, without these clouds creating that darkness in the daytime, you would have just had this beam, like an intense beam of like just regular sunlight. This sucker would have just hit a resonance in that area and just crumbled down Jericho, exactly like it hit a resonance over here at Mount Sinai. Just the same exact system moving out there. The archaeology shows that at the time period they say they were doing this at Jericho, that no such thing was happening. If you just move the dates of the Exodus back a couple centuries, suddenly you have everything. Like all the archaeology is there. All of the archaeology for all of that stuff is there, but you just have to move the dates back a couple centuries. That's how you get Jericho back. And that's how you get your Joseph story and all the others, the slave story and everything. And that's also how you get this. Just move the dates back, and then there's this like huge spike in seismological activity, geologic turmoil, tumult. From moving the dates back a couple centuries, you get Jericho, you get all your archaeology, you get your magnetic excursion event, and your magnetic excursion event gives you all your big ticket items in Exodus. A few days after Jericho, they were having an issue with the Amorites. It says that a bunch of like stones from heaven came and just like fell down and like crushed the Amorites. That's exactly what this system would do. If it had just drifted out here, just off the coast a little, and fired up and started pushing a bunch of that hot air up extra intensely. And so with all of that dust and the condensation nuclei and all that moisture being blasted up into the atmosphere, especially if it did it like extra intensely just for a spell, then it could blast it even beyond like the normal limits. That absolutely would create massive hailstones, and then those would just get like arced out onto the land over here. This could easily create hailstones the size of boulders. The final thing is a few days after this event with the stones from heaven crushing the Amorite army, there was still a remnant left, and they had to fight them, but they needed more time to finish the battle. The story says the sun and the moon stood still for an entire extra day. That's actually exactly what this system would do if it was firing up extra intensely. The auroras, as they already exist, they can make the night look like it's the evening. They can get that bright. And so during a magnetic excursion event, these auroras could easily fire up to the point of where they turned the night into day. They could literally get that bright. If this were like in the north looking south, and this is Canaan over here, if they're standing over here having a battle, if you're over here and this fires up and turns the night into day, but it's up above the clouds over here, all you would really perceive is that you would have this diffuse light coming down from the clouds, and it wouldn't be moving. It would just be this light, this really bright light. If you mix these colors all together, it would make something very akin to sunlight, and you would just perceive that it was coming from the same place. You would also notice, because it's so bright, you would not see this column of fire over here off the coast, but you would notice that the base of the clouds over here, the cloud ceiling, was lit up and like luminous and glowing. And from a really far distance over here, that would very much appear like the moon. It would have a very lunar appearance to it. So as far as you were concerned from this perspective over here, it would look as though the the sun and the moon were standing still. A lot of ancient people actually saw these events. This has been associated with other cultures' version of God, we could say. The multi-armed Vishnu and Krishna, the Nagas, trickling into other cultures, the Greek Medusa, some of the ancient cultures that even drew this on cave walls. You might also recognize this shape here. This is the menorah. It doesn't say in the Exodus story that they actually saw that. It just talks about the column of fire. It doesn't talk about the bowls. They might have just never been in the right place at the right time to see the bowls, but what it does say, God told Moses how to make it, how to make the menorah. So he kept having to correct him to do it over and over. It was very important that it be done right. One might imagine why that would be the case when you realize that the menorah is an exact scientific diagram of the natural phenomena that caused that entire event. Before any of this happened, before the plagues of Egypt, he saw a burning bush. He saw a burning bush, but it wasn't burning. It was on fire, but the flames were not consuming the bush. Whenever you have major seismic activity, you get a lot of layers of the earth grinding against one another, like a giant Van de Graaff generator. It causes a bunch of electric charge to be displaced. It'll actually send a huge surge of electric charge up into the surface of the earth. And that charge will go to high locations, like mountaintops and stuff. You would just have all this electric charge just rushing into these mountaintops. A bunch of electric charge. When this charge rushes into high places, it will also seek out the things that are the most like antennas. If you had a nice green thorn bush up there, it would have rushed into that thorn bush. It'll actually burst out, blasts out of it. It's called St. Elmo's fire. St. Elmo's fire is this really cool, ghostly sapphire blue. It creates a fire. It's electrical fire rather than just an electrical arc. If you were over here and you were wearing your sandals, you would be electrically insulated from the ground. This high voltage, it would jump out and arc into you like a bolt of lightning. It would strike you just hit you like that. If you had sandals on, that would be a major safety hazard. It specifically says in the story, God told him to take his sandals off. That's a really fascinating detail. That's exactly what you would need to do. That could have been the Exodus before the Exodus even started. That's your burning bush. St. Elmo's fire. A St. Elmo's fire, electrical fire like that, it doesn't burn the structure that it's erupting off of. It would not be burning. It's like fire, but it's not burning. There's your burning bush that doesn't burn. It's caused by seismic activity, just like all of this is caused by seismic activity. So this is all my contribution to this whole solving all of this. They described it very, very specifically, and that's what gives it away. This whole thing is described way too specifically, and that's why this is all a dead giveaway that this really did happen. This is like a giant fingerprint and a key all matching at exactly the same time. It's just way too specific about phenomena that they would have had no idea about. It says that when they were out here in the wilderness, following this system around, that manna from heaven would fall overnight with a little bit of moisture, but it also came with jewelry. It came with jewelry. So manna would rain down overnight, and then quails would rain down in the evening. At one point, there were so many quote-unquote quails that rained down on their camp that it was a cubit deep. This is above most people's knees. It would be up to the thigh area of most people, all the way to every horizon that they could see. That's an insane amount of quote-unquote quails that was raining down on their camp. Quantities that could bury you up to your knees to every horizon. You would have remnants of these things out here in the desert because they were following this all up and down the coast for 40 years. They were following this system around. They were getting manna the whole time. Whatever you think about what that manna was and where exactly it came from, they were getting it the whole time, and they were getting their quails the whole time for millions of people for 40 years. So in that, the manna came with a lot of jewelry. So a lot of that's going to be ending up, if it's falling from heaven, a lot of it's going to be ending up in random places, nooks and crannies where they just never found it or just kind of stayed out there. And so if you go and do a bunch of archaeology out here, you are going to find just unreal quantities of jewelry and and quail remnants, quail bones, like stupendous, prodigious quantities all over the place. Gargantuan amounts of this stuff, not even very far beneath the soil, depending on, the local rates of deposition. And it also says that when they got back to Canaan, they kept a sample of the manna around for centuries in a jar. What that tells you is that manna can be kept around for centuries. And if it can be kept around for centuries, it can be kept around for a lot longer. Whatever it was, whatever you want to believe about what it was, you're going to find it all over the place. When you just go out here and start doing a bunch of archaeology, there will be copious amounts of evidence for manna and quails in the desert wherever the Exodus happened, presumably here, but wherever it happened, there will be just unreal quantities of it all throughout that wilderness area. Even if you're a hardcore skeptic about it all, I've still shown that there are two things that precisely match exactly those crazy descriptions that they provided. There's your entire Exodus event. That's 100% of it. No stone left unturned, no anomaly left unexplained. There's all of it. So even the most hardcore skeptic now can see that they were indeed telling 100% the truth, regardless of what you think about any other subjects or any other events or whatever. This larger-than-life event did indeed happen, and we can confirm this all over the place.